Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Je vous souhaite la bienvenue dans cette troisième session de notre conférence parlementaire d'automne sur le thème « Relever les défis sécuritaires pour la région de l'OSCE et au-delà. Le rôle des parlementaires dans la promotion de la coopération régionale ». C'est notre deuxième jour de conférence et d'autres avant moi l'ont fait, mais je tiens à remercier nos hôtes mongols pour leur hospitalité. Notre agenda est très chargé. Aussi, je me garderai de commentaires trop longs. Cette troisième session se concentre sur ce que l'OSCE nous qualifions de dimension humaine, de la sécurité et plus particulièrement sur le développement des institutions démocratiques, des droits humains, de la liberté des médias, de la tolérance religieuse et de l'égalité des sexes. Vous savez sans doute que la France est souvent appelée la patrie des droits de l'homme. En tant que Français, j'accorde une importance toute particulière à la dimension humaine de l'OSCE. Les plus hautes autorités de l'État ont d'ailleurs fait des droits de l'homme une priorité de la politique étrangère de la France, qui se veut être exemplaire, non pas pour donner des leçons, mais parce que c'est son histoire et que c'est son message. Exemplaire pour porter les libertés fondamentales, c'est son combat, c'est aussi son honneur. Avec 8 milliards d'euros d'engagement en 2014, l'aide publique française au développement contribue à un monde plus juste et plus durable. Le but de la France est de faire émerger de nouveaux modèles de développement qui permettent à la fois d'assurer la prospérité de l'ensemble de la population mondiale et de préserver la planète. C'est pourquoi droits de l'homme et protection de l'environnement qui entourent ces mêmes hommes vont de pair. Et je me permets de faire une toute petite digression pour vous rappeler l'enjeu crucial qui nous attend dans le cadre de la COP 21 qui aura lieu dans moins de 100 jours à Paris et où nous espérons que vos délégations seront particulièrement nombreuses. Sans transition et afin de faciliter l'interprétation lors de ce forum, je m'en demanderai à ceux d'entre vous qui ont l'intention de lire leur intervention d'en faire parvenir une copie au secrétariat pour qu'elle soit transmise aux interprètes. Avant de passer la parole à M. Bold Luvunsamnan, membre de la délégation de la Mongolie auprès de l'Assemblée parlementaire de l'OSCE, qui va nous parler du cas particulier de son pays, je tiens à souligner qu'au mois de mai 2015, la France a salué la ratification par la Mongolie de la Convention internationale pour la protection de toutes les personnes contre les disparitions forcées, ainsi que la ratification par la Mongolie du deuxième protocole facultatif se rapportant au pacte international sur les droits civils et politiques visant à abolir la peine de mort. La France a également salué la ratification du protocole facultatif se rapportant à la Convention contre la torture et autres peines ou traitements cruels, inhumains ou dégradants. Je prends également note du fait que fin août, Oulan-Bator fut ville hôte de la 20e réunion du Forum des institutions nationales de défense des droits de l'homme pour la région de l'Asie et du Pacifique, au cours de laquelle les plus hautes autorités mongoles ont clairement affiché leur orientation en faveur d'une Mongolie embrassant les droits de l'homme à bras-le-corps. Nous allons écouter nos distingués intervenants les uns après les autres. Si vous avez des questions et des commentaires à leur adresser, je vous invite à le faire dans le cadre du débat qui va suivre leur présentation. À cet effet, une liste est actuellement ouverte et je vous invite à signaler votre nom et votre pays auprès du personnel du secrétariat pour vous inscrire. Monsieur Luvunsan Vandan a été élu à plusieurs reprises au sein du Parlement. Il fut également plusieurs fois ministre, en particulier ministre des Affaires étrangères de 2012 à 2014. Aussi, avec beaucoup de respect et beaucoup d'amitié, Monsieur le ministre, je vous donne la parole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, fellow parliamentarians. Let me extend my warm greetings to all of you. Philosophical principles of individual freedom and human rights would make a lively and long discussion. History confirms that many thinkers and politicians made ingenious ideas regarding the matter. Today I address you with not the general principles, nor the ideologies, but with the practical lessons and implications of individual freedom and human rights based on the Mongolian political framework. I hope that others will opt to compare, learn, or disregard the lessons pertaining to Mongolia. First, the functioning of the Mongolian democratic institutions. The Mongolian democracy, celebrating the 25th anniversary of its multiple events this year, has many proud moments of accomplishments to indulge the world. I talked about them in detail during my speech at the Mongolia EU Interparliamentary Group 10th Assembly in February this year. The Mongolian democracy affords its citizens the same universally accepted human rights, freedoms, private property, freedom of movement. Despite such achievements of national and international pride, some flaws and negative images in economic reforms and in information of political institutions and legal systems have inflicted damages into our democracy. Individual freedoms have been curtailed. Human rights have been infringed. We acknowledge that this requires a special parliamentary attention. We note that the slow pace of development and immaturity of democratic governance have turned into a major counterproductive factor. Though we have generally created positive ideals and legal environment for democracy, we should not forget that the agents for their upholding and implementation are individuals and sectoral structures. It is the tragedy of today's Mongolia that the law enforcement structures have increasingly been turned into instruments of lawlessness by and for the authorities or some political groupings. These are many examples that prove this. There are many examples. Many have been unjustly prosecuted, imprisoned by fabrication and force, illegally interrogated, publicly and systematically labeled with allegations of fabricated criminal offenses. Such cases are also an indirect proof that there continue to operate such organized trans-party economic interest grouping and mechanism that wages a war on their opponents. On the politicians' unwavering determination, together with the Parliament's conscious effort to stand for its citizens, can put an end to this powerful and interwoven system of repression. Our history of politics and government testifies that repression always entails serious violations of human rights. At the early years of people's revolutions in the beginning of last century, such repressive campaigns against so-called counter-revolutionaries, the Western-oriented, the nationalists, targeted the best minds and citizens. Now, even in our democratic government, no one can guarantee against repression under the pretext of fighting corruption. Unfortunately, the fight against corruption is turning into widespread witch hunt and arbitrary arrests that jeopardize our constitutional guarantees and achievements in human rights. Repression is always committed under the name of nice goals and label. However, its violations of human rights are most severe. Repression applies very inhuman methods. One of the important goals of today's Mongolian parliament is thus to create a mechanism that prevents all grounds for repression in the name of corruption struggle. Sustainability of democracy is contingent upon diversification of the economy and ability to absorb the windfall wealth. Certain revenues stemming from commodities export to meet growing Chinese demand have sent shockwaves throughout Mongolian democratic values and principles, causing sclerotic, brittle, and vulnerable social order. This is a lesson we must not forget. It is once again proved that sustainability, responsibility, and accountability of politicians have not been well established as institutions. Many now recognize that Maturity of the political parties is the key factor in protecting democracy. Poverty and unemployment are limiting factors of individual freedom and human rights. Hence, economic reforms must take place in conjunction with protecting individual freedom and human rights. It is redundant to list all accomplishments the Mongolian democracy can be proud of at its 25th anniversary. The most important one is that our parliament has stood at the helm of our democratic system and as a symbol of democratic values. Second, indicators of individual freedoms and human rights in Mongolia. 25 years ago, I was one of the pioneers of democratic revolution and organized a student union to join the struggle. It was not only a matter of honor for me, it was my own belief and values that led me to take such a life-changing decision. Since then, fighting for human rights and individual freedom have become my inner driving force. Today, to a certain extent, Mongolia has provided its citizens with freedom of speech, freedom of opinion, freedom of movement, freedom of private ownership, religious freedom, right to protect the environment, right not to be discriminated, right to fight against family violence, and other fundamental principles of human rights. But a closer look may reveal that challenges, problems, and backward developments still persist. It is unfortunate that the new research by Mongolian human rights NGOs in their 2015 Universal Periodic Review shares and confirms my concerns. For example, the national system of ensuring and protecting human rights and individual freedoms is not fully functional. The implementation of UN Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment or punishment is not satisfactory. Even though Mongolia ratified over 40 years ago the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the freedom of opinion and expression, the right to independent media are being violated. Right against discrimination remains a challenge. Mongolia has enacted laws on gender equality, on protection of witnesses, and amended laws against family violence and criminalized discrimination. All these have been great achievements. Still, discrimination on the basis of age, gender, sexual harassment, disability, belief, appearance, and social origin remain the main types of discrimination against some citizens. As environmental offenses increase in frequency, the right to fair trial is frequently violated. The absence of legal environment to protect public interest before the court and limited access by the local communities to court remain unresolved. Such and other findings and conclusions by various NGOs in their fight of human rights can no longer be ignored. The fact that human rights violations persist in every sphere and segment of the society, irrespective of time and space, means that the effective functioning of our democratic institutions requires constant maturing in enforcement and initiative. And last points about why parliamentarism is core mechanism that propagates human rights. Globalism, while promoting unity of interest, the big picture and united vision for the future, also has side effect that limits individual freedom and creates vulnerability in human rights. Major economic decisions, market crisis, and fierce competitions for profits have wider effect on individuals. This is a key issue pertaining to globalism. Crisis due to poverty, struggle for resource domination, and clashes of ideologies exist not only regionally but also within the nation state and produce various excuses to human rights violations. There are numerous examples on this. In other words, we live in an age when joint efforts of politicians and cooperation of parliamentary democracies are required in order to ensure that soft solutions that reflect humane, accommodative, and of individual freedom and protective of human rights are embedded in economic reforms. This can be accomplished through democratically elected representatives such as us, gathered here, that understand and prioritize human rights and individual rights. Who else would do it? How politicians decide on matter shall determine the present and the future. Politicians and the parliament alike must be the guardians of human rights. Thank you for your attention.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre, pour cette présentation intéressante et riche qui nous a grandement éclairé sur la situation actuelle en Mongolie. Maintenant, je vais passer la parole à Madame Beat Trankman, qui est coordonnateur résident des Nations Unies et représentant résident du Programme des Nations Unies pour le développement. Madame Trankman, vous avez la parole.
Thank you. Chairperson, Monsieur le Sénateur Alain Néry, Vice President of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, Your Excellency Mr. Bolt, Member of Parliament of Mongolia, Honorable Members of Parliaments, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to all of you. I have decided to focus my remarks a bit on the development angle and the role of Parliament in development, in advancing development. And there's good reasons for this, of course. In only 10 days, world leaders are scheduled to adopt a new global development framework, the Sustainable Development Goals, to replace the MDGs ending at the end of this year. Parliaments around the world will be instrumental in translating this new framework into action and ensuring that countries can achieve these goals within the 15-year time frame until 2030. It's a great pleasure for me to be here today and to speak to you about this subject, which is so central to the mandate of the United Nations. And let me also thank the OSCE for its important contribution to peace and development. I would like to take the opportunity to thank the Parliament of Mongolia for hosting this important event, which follows, of course, on the heels of the 25th anniversary of Mongolia's parliament. If approved, and of course we're all optimistic that they will be approved, the SDGs are the most ambitious global development agenda ever agreed by governments at the United Nations. They are not only aspirational, they are necessary for the future of our planet, for the benefit of all people of the world. They provide a comprehensive blueprint of political, economic, and social transformation of all countries, developed and developing countries alike, to eradicate poverty, reduce inequality, address climate change, protect the planet, and foster peaceful and inclusive societies. Strong democratic governance is seen both as an enabler for achieving the SDGs and as a goal in and of itself. The MDGs are the most successful poverty reduction effort of all times. However, there's also widespread recognitions that countries, where they face challenges in implementing, it is usually a lack of institutional capacity, weak governance, sometimes in combination with the absence of peace and stability, which held progress back on the MDGs. In response to that recognition, a specific goal, Goal 16, has been introduced into the SDGs, which focuses on the creation of peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. It aims to promote the respect for human rights and human security, the effective rule of law, good governance, citizens' participation in decision-making, as well as transparent, effective, and accountable institutions at all levels. Ladies and gentlemen, the importance of effective institutions is perhaps clearest in countries that are experiencing strong growth and are looking for ways to translate the benefits into sustainable human development that can be shared by all. Let me highlight 6 key points on the role of Parliament in this regard. Firstly, accountability. Parliament, by definition, any nation's most representative institution, plays a critical role in passing fair and sound laws, as well as overseeing the actions of the executive. In this way, Parliament represents, if you like, a downward accountability mechanism that responds to the people of the country. Opinion surveys around the world show an almost universal distrust of political elites. The need for Parliament to be an anchor of accountability and trust is therefore greater than ever, especially in eliminating corruption and promoting transparent campaign financing. The UN Convention on Anti-Corruption recognizes the key role that Parliament can play in these areas and is an important starting point. Secondly, gender inequality remains the most pervasive form of inequality around the world. This is evidenced in gender-based violence and discrimination, the gaps in women's access to employment and financial assets, and their underrepresentation in political and public life in many countries. Acknowledging and redressing these inequalities of power and resources requires advancing equal representation and participation of women in decision-making. The promotion of gender equality and empowerment of women is central to the mandate of the United Nations and intrinsic to its development approach. When women are not represented, issues such as quality health and education services, child and elderly care are often out of sight and out of mind. In Mongolia, the share of female members of parliament has been increased by more than threefold between the last two elections to now 14.5% at national level. Some more effort is needed, of course, to reach the global average of 22% and the MDG target of 30%. The ongoing reform of the electoral and political party law offers an important opportunity to further strengthen women's political representation, and the UN would like to invite political party leaders to follow through on their encouraging commitments to provide women with winnable seats as a good example for other parliaments around the world. Third, a vibrant civil society, meaningful dialogue and engagement with citizens are crucial to inclusive policy making. The protection of civic space and adequate procedures to allow for public participation in legislative processes not only makes for better solutions to complex problems, but also guarantees the representation of interests of otherwise marginalized groups. This is at the core of the democratic idea and is key to addressing inequality, which is so pervasive in many of our societies. At this meeting, I would like to congratulate the government of Mongolia for its recent efforts towards increased citizens' participation in state affairs. The Parliament of Mongolia has recently passed a law on drafting, submitting and implementing legislation, the main thrust of which is to increase the quality of the legislative process through consultation and public scrutiny. And UNDP is honored to have provided technical support in preparation of this law. Fourth, in building successful open societies, guaranteed access to information is a most critical element. Freedom of speech and freedom of association also play a crucial part. Citizens should be able to discuss issues of the day, challenge the media and government, and when they see fit, register their dissenting views in a peaceful manner. In turn, those in positions of public trust and authority should listen to citizens' concerns. Many parliaments have built-in procedures for this purpose that systematize citizen input into their lawmaking and oversight roles. Fifth, the parliament as a body that represents different stakeholders and interest groups in a country has an important conflict prevention and resolution function. This can include finding the path to mitigate religious and ethnic tensions, brokering consensus amongst competing debates over natural resources, and so on. Countries that do not have a functioning parliament often face persistent conflicts and tensions that become a main driver of developmental failure and regression. The key here is that Parliament needs to be truly representational. 6, Parliament has a key role in ensuring that all people enjoy their full human rights. This role includes overseeing the implementation of international human rights treaties and conventions and making national law consistent with these obligations. Many parliaments now have parliamentary subcommittees that specifically focus on human rights. The Universal Peer Review of the United Nations Human Rights Commission provides an excellent opportunity for constructive dialogue to improve countries' human rights situations, and we hope that parliaments can play a bigger role in these dialogues. Protecting people's rights is a key ingredient to make development inclusive. Ladies and gentlemen, before closing, let me say a few words about the UN and how we work with Parliament. Parliament is a key partner and stakeholder for the entire United Nations. UNDP, for example, as the United Nations Development Programme, supports parliaments in over 70 countries to help them fulfill their oversight role more effectively and make them more representative. In Mongolia and in other countries, UN agencies work closely with Parliament in providing advice and support with regards to reforms across various sectors. UNDP also supports parliaments in strengthening their essential lawmaking function, improving research and policy analysis capacities, enhancing two-way communications between elected representatives and citizens, and utilizing ICT solutions in these two-way communications. As highlighted in my previous points, I think it's evidence that parliaments around the world have a major role to play in making the Sustainable Development Goals a reality. They will need to ensure that the necessary enabling laws for implementation of the agenda are passed and that ministers and officials are held to account for national progress against the goals. They will also need to put in place adequate resource allocations from public budgets for achievement of the SDGs and scrutinize the efficient and transparent use of funds towards intended objectives in national and local budgets. And in representing those who elected them, parliaments can ensure an ongoing dialogue with citizens, civil society on the development goals and their process. The United Nations system stands ready to assist parliaments in the implementation of the new post-2015 development agenda at country level. Ladies and gentlemen, the SDGs present a huge opportunity to move the world towards a different quality of development, one that is equal, creates jobs, and does not harm the planet. This will require the involvement of all of us. We are the first generation that can end poverty. We are also likely the last generation that can save our planet. Thank you very much.
Merci, Madame, pour cette intéressante présentation. Je vais maintenant donner la parole à ceux qui en ont fait la demande auprès du secrétariat. Parce que nous sommes une assemblée parlementaire, je souhaite que le plus grand nombre de parlementaires puissent s'exprimer et donner leur avis sur ce sujet particulièrement important. C'est pourquoi, sans plus attendre, je vais donner la parole à M. Philippe Mahou de la Belgique et que M. Metin Bédar de la Turquie se prépare.
De l'organisation de cette réunion et en soulignant la qualité des deux intervenants, puisque c'est de droits de l'homme dont il s'agit, je ne peux, comme parlementaire, éviter de parler du problème qui est le problème aigu auquel nous sommes tous humainement confrontés, qui est le problème des réfugiés. Le premier des droits de l'homme, pour l'ensemble des individus qui vivent sur cette terre, c'est d'abord de pouvoir vivre, de pouvoir élever ses enfants dans sa famille, leur donner une éducation, leur accorder les soins de santé et protéger leur existence même. On constate que pour une immense partie des habitants de cette planète, ce n'est pas le cas et de manière particulière, en raison précisément des conflits qui habitent la région du Moyen-Orient. Alors, je voudrais souligner et reconnaître l'attitude positive de la Commission européenne, mais en même temps dénoncer le fait qu'à l'intérieur même de l'Union européenne, certains pays refusent d'assumer cette responsabilité, cette obligation, je dirais, d'accueil, cette obligation de trouver une solution à ces problèmes humains qui sont posés et qui vont continuer à se poser. Je crois très réellement, Monsieur le Président, que nous devons, dans l'ensemble de nos assemblées, susciter le maximum d'adhésion à cet accueil des réfugiés. Je parlais des pays de l'Union européenne, mais je fais, et je pense qu'on doit le faire, un appel aux autres pays en soulignant que les pays limitrophes du conflit remplissent un travail extraordinaire parce que c'est eux qui assument la plus grande responsabilité de l'accueil de ces réfugiés et que accueillir des réfugiés, c'est l'accueillir sur son territoire, mais c'est aussi aider les pays limitrophes à pouvoir le faire. Et je souligne à cet égard la déclaration de Mme Lahengri a faite hier et qui consiste à tenter de trouver des solutions dans les endroits où les réfugiés se trouvent actuellement. La deuxième chose que je veux dire, Monsieur le Président, c'est de considérer que, vous l'avez dit d'ailleurs, on doit mesurer la démocratie à ses actes. Eh bien, on peut dire que dans tous les endroits où l'égalité des hommes et des femmes n'existe pas, où la liberté religieuse, le respect des religions n'existe pas, on peut dire que la démocratie a encore du chemin à faire. Je pense que cette liberté, ce respect des religions doit s'adresser à tous ceux qui croient, mais aussi à tous ceux qui ne croient pas. Et enfin, et je terminerai par là, je me suis réjoui de la présence de la délégation russe tout à l'heure. Je pense que les contradictions, les différences d'opinion existent, mais en ce qui concerne le conflit qui génère l'afflux de réfugiés, le rôle de la communauté internationale et, à travers la communauté internationale, le rôle des Nations Unies paraît fondamental et donc c'est aussi sur les causes finalement de l'existence de ces réfugiés qu'il faudra agir et il faudra mettre l'ensemble des efforts de la communauté internationale pour y trouver des solutions dans la négociation.
Merci, Monsieur Mahou. Et je crois que vous avez bien fait d'employer le nom de réfugiés et non pas de migrants, ce qui sera d'un effet très pédagogique auprès de nos populations. Je demanderai aux intervenants de vouloir bien respecter un temps de parole de 2 minutes afin que chacun puisse s'exprimer. La parole est à Monsieur Bédard et Monsieur Keating se prépare.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, 2 million Syrians and Iraqi under temporary protection in Turkey, and $6 billion have been spent for Syrians until now. Unfortunately, contribution of the international community is $400 billion only, and much more below the expectation. On the other hand, of irregular migrants prefer Turkish borders to go to European countries sharply increased in recent years. The picture on the screen belongs one of the latest child victims of the migrant crisis, and it is evidence of our desperation. There is nothing to say on the picture of the body of this 3-year-old toddler, because we are at the point where words failed. Refugee issue is a serious international problem. It is not only an issue for Syria or Turkey or even Europe. This concerns the international community as a whole. Saving and helping people in distress should be seen as a joint responsibility of humanity. Given the growing number of refugees and their legitimate seek for an honorable life, we firmly believe that countries in Europe must address this issue in a visionary and forward-looking spirit. While we appreciate Chancellor Merkel's recent statement to welcome 800,000 refugees to Germany, we also encourage the other members of the European Union all over the world to share this burden. Thank you.
Merci. La parole est à Monsieur Derek Keating et Mme Marietta Tidei se prépare.
Cathaoirleach agus bhálum cúpla focail ará ar an over Táfachtacht Seo. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I welcome the opportunity of saying a few words on this particular issue, and I want to thank at the outset Mr. Montella, who was prepared to engage with me on this issue before we arrived in Ulaanbaatar, because I did have some concerns that we weren't going to have the opportunity to discussing this issue. And let me say what this issue is about. This issue is about the single greatest catastrophe in Europe since World War II. Let me also spell out what I believe this issue is not about. It is not about a crisis of borders. It is about a crisis of solidarity. Those are the sentiments expressed by Ban Ki-moon, the General Secretary of the United Nations Commission. Now, we saw some of the images, one depicted today. There are many other images where it was displayed that not only were we not prepared to allow people into our country, but we were prepared to hurt them. We were prepared to cut them with sharp razor blades. We were prepared to lock people in cages and throw food at them. We were prepared to allow people into our train stations and not allow them freedom of movement. But if that is one image that stays with us, that is that image of a little boy lying on the beach of Turkey, silenced through death, and yet speaking to the world. We must continue to hear that young boy speaking. We are all here today as delegates to the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. We are all here as members of our parliaments and with different political perspectives on life. But we are here as as members of one human family, and that must be where we start from. Before we consider how our countries are going to allow people in, before we consider how our communities are going to respond, before we consider if we're even going to allow people into our homes, we must open our hearts in the first instance. And finally, can I say that this is not just a European issue. This is a global issue. It requires a global response. And one of the things that concerns me is the absence, is the silence of many other countries further away. They have to play their part too in helping us to create an all-inclusive, equal and open society. We are all members of the one human family. Thank you.
Merci. La parole est à Madame Marietta Tidei et que Monsieur Jean-Paul Dupré se prépare.
Sì, grazie Presidente. Anche vorrei concentrare il mio intervento sul tema dei profughi e vorrei farlo ricordando alcuni numeri. Prima sono stati ricordati i 2 milioni di profughi rifugiati in Siria e io vorrei ricordare invece quelle quasi 3.000 persone che l'Alto Commissariato per i rifugiati delle Nazioni Unite ci dice essere morti nel solo 2015. E vedete, ogni giorno siamo costretti a contare cadaveri, le salme di quanti cercano asilo e protezione in Occidente, scampando da fame, miseria, brutalità, inseguiti dalla violenza che li raggiunge sui barconi, sui camion e su altri mezzi di fortuna che la brutalità spesso inventa. I corpi degli uomini, delle donne, dei bambini morti sui camion, sulle spiagge. Prima abbiamo visto la foto del piccolo Alan sulla spiaggia di Bodrum, una foto che stringe il cuore, che commuove. E queste foto, queste immagini provocano sdegno, rabbia, ma questi sentimenti io credo non debbano affievolirsi quando i notiziari tacciono. Anche se non c'è una tragedia in quel momento, in silenzio, il traffico di esseri umani purtroppo prosegue. E lo sdegno, la commozione non possono più bastare, perché occorrono azioni concrete, occorre una solidarietà maggiore, occorre soprattutto una visione politica ampia e condivisa, perché le migrazioni sono nel DNA umano. Siamo tutti migranti e fissare un gruppo umano ad un luogo è impossibile. Troppe le variabili in gioco, guerre, carestie, povertà, dittature, cause profonde in cui esiste anche una nostra precisa responsabilità. E per quanto i viaggi della speranza o della morte siano pericolosi, la molla della disperazione è molto più potente di qualsiasi rischio. Solidarietà è il concetto di base dal quale dobbiamo partire. Se un gruppo umano cerca rifugio fuori dal proprio paese, perché lì non è garantita la vita dei suoi membri, la collettività deve farsene carico. E vedete, alcuni Stati stanno approcciando la questione con grande senso di responsabilità, Prima veniva ricordata la Germania, ce ne sono molti di altri stati che stanno facendo questo con grande senso di responsabilità, ma altri purtroppo si comportano con una durezza inaccettabile. È incredibile, devastante vedere che si innalzano muri, si mobilitano gli eserciti, si usano i lacrimogeni per tenere lontani uomini, donne e bambini indifesi che di certo non sono né un esercito invasore né criminali da arrestare. E alle volte io direi per fortuna la gente comune è molto più saggia e lungimirante di tanti governi. È stato bello vedere i tedeschi, gli austriaci, applaudire l'arrivo dei migranti e provvedere ai loro bisogni immediati. Commovente vedere che si trattava di un moto spontaneo che partiva dal cuore. Gente che riusciva a valutare le persone che aveva davanti per quello che erano, vittime in cerca di un rifugio. Io penso che sia necessario che anche da questa Assemblea, che si è più volte espressa su questo tema, io voglio ricordare a tutti che anche in tante sessioni annuali abbiamo approvato risoluzioni su questo tema, dicevo, è necessario che anche da questa Assemblea sia lanciato un messaggio forte e chiaro a tutti i nostri governi. Accogliere i migranti è naturale e doveroso. Dobbiamo, a mio avviso, far leva su due concetti chiave. La gestione dei flussi migratori è una responsabilità collettiva e non un fardello da addossare ai singoli Stati. Ognuno deve farsi carico, secondo possibilità, di una parte di rifugiati, nessuno escluso. Per questo è importante attuare anche il programma di distribuzione che giustamente la Commissione ha approvato.
Merci Madame Tidei pour votre intervention. La parole est à Monsieur Jean-Paul Dupré et Monsieur Mart Nutt de l'Estonie se prépare.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Tout d'abord, également remercier nos hôtes mongols pour la qualité de l'accueil. Mais vous dire également, Monsieur le Président, que personnellement, je considère qu'il y a un dysfonctionnement dans le cadre de l'organisation des travaux de cette Assemblée parlementaire, de par le trop peu de temps de parole donné à ces mêmes parlementaires, et notamment lors de la première session portant sur le problème de la sécurité. Je vais intervenir sur ce sujet de la sécurité. Je n'ai pu le faire hier matin car cela n'a pas été possible. Même si je vais évoquer le problème des migrants, cette situation relève en effet de ce que des réfugiés, des exilés sont victimes de conflits armés. Je veux évoquer la crise sécuritaire générée par notamment la situation au Moyen-Orient. Nous sommes tous des citoyens du monde et aucun de nous ne peut rester insensible à la douleur et aux drames humains qui en découlent. Où est la solidarité des pays de l'espace Schengen, des 57 pays de l'OSCE, mais également de la communauté internationale pour lutter contre les causes de ce qu'est cette crise? S'agissant de l'Union européenne, le principe de solidarité entre États membres implique leur engagement commun à renforcer leurs frontières extérieures pour une libre circulation des personnes dans l'espace. Mais pour les États membres les plus exposés aux phénomènes migratoires, le principe de solidarité implique aussi un partage équitable des charges, notamment financières, de la gestion des frontières extérieures. Cela n'est pas encore assez le cas. Par ailleurs, si les États membres sont souverains en matière d'entrée et de séjour des étrangers, faute de règles européennes communes en matière d'immigration ou d'asile, ce qui est une déficience, à mon avis, majeure, chaque État devrait, par solidarité et pour des raisons humanitaires évidentes, accepter de prendre en charge une partie des migrants. S'agissant de l'OSCE, aucun texte n'impose une quelconque obligation en la matière aux 57 États. Toutefois, chacun est laissé face à sa conscience. Un engagement officiel, Monsieur le Président, de la part de l'OSCE s'impose. Serons-nous capables de le prendre?
Monsieur Dupré.
Permettez que je termine, Monsieur le Président.
Monsieur Dupré, si vous voulez que tous les parlementaires s'expriment comme vous le souhaitez, il faut respecter aussi le temps de parole.
Non, mais alors, les 2 minutes de temps de parole ont un caractère tout à fait
Allez-y, continuez.
L'Union européenne a fait un certain nombre d'annonces, mais il revient à la communauté internationale de s'associer à ces mesures et à ces efforts. J'en appelle ici à tous pour que nous puissions agir de façon qui permette de remettre ces pays sur la voie de la prospérité par la paix en luttant contre toute forme d'extrémisme et d'intégrisme. Démontrons que nous avons la capacité de relever ce défi, comme l'ont évoqué avec juste raison et avec force nos amis et collègues d'Algérie.
Merci,
Il y va de l'avenir de l'humanité.
La parole est à Monsieur Martnut et Madame Christine Muttonen se prépare.
First, I'd like to thank Mongolian Parliament and delegation for excellent organizing of the OSCE PA autumn meeting. We are happy to recognize Mongolia for the successful development of democratic institutions and human rights. At the same time, there are still unsolved problems in this field. Also, new problems with the democratic institutions and human rights appear in some of the OSCE countries. Annexation of Crimea by Russian Federation and aggression in the southeast of Ukraine seriously hurt democratic values and commitments and its clear setback of democratic development. The only way to solve that conflict can take place by withdrawal of Russian troops and ending of military support to separatists. Respect to territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine is the key factor and fundamental principle to guarantee peace and democracy, as well as protect human rights in the region. Situation of human rights has become much worse in many places in the world during last years. Extremely dangerous it is in Middle East concerning Islamic State activities and mass migration. But the violation of human rights of Crimean Tatars is and remains a serious problem as well. OSCE should observe the situation in Crimea and take measures to protect these people. Lack of security made vulnerable the protection of human rights also in eastern Ukraine. Result of it is millions of displaced persons and refugees from this region. More than 1 year ago, Russian authorities arrested Estonian policeman Eston Kohver in Estonian territory and carried him to Russian prison. Some weeks ago, the Russian court punished him illegally to 15 years prison, what violates strongly his human rights. European Parliament adopted last week a resolution to release Eston Kohver and Ukrainian citizens Nadia Savchenko, Oleg Sentsov and Alexander Kolchenko, who were arrested by Russian authorities. There is still no positive reaction by Russia. Estonian delegation invites OSCE to continue pressure to Russia to release those illegally arrested persons and give them opportunity to arrive home. Thank you for attention.
Merci. La parole est à Madame Christine Muttonen et que Madame Abramiken se prépare.
Vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender, geschätzte Kollegen und Kolleginnen. Manchmal frage ich mich, wann wir endlich aus der Geschichte lernen und nicht vergessen oder gar verdrängen. Viele Menschen in Europa, aber auch weltweit waren im 20. Jahrhundert auf der Flucht. Ich komme aus Österreich. Viele sind während der Nazizeit vor ihren eigenen Landsleuten geflohen. 1956 gab es einen großen Flüchtlingsstrom aus Ungarn. 180.000 Menschen aus Ungarn wurden bei uns aufgenommen. 1968 waren es 160.000 Menschen aus der damaligen Tschechoslowakei und 90.000 Flüchtlinge nach dem Bosnienkrieg. Auch jetzt versuchen wir einen Ansturm von Schutzsuchenden zu bewältigen, von solchen, die bleiben wollen und von solchen, die weiterziehen wollen. Ich glaube, die humanitäre Frage ist im Moment die dringendste, denn der Winter klopft bereits an und wir dürfen nicht wieder erfahren müssen und solche Bilder, wie wir das gesehen haben, sehen müssen, dass Menschen, nachdem viele von ihnen zuerst ertrunken sind, andere sind erstickt, in Lastwegen zusammengepfercht, jetzt auch noch erfrieren. Aber, und das wurde auch schon erwähnt, ich glaube, die Flüchtlingsfrage ist eine globale Frage. Wir brauchen internationale Strategie zur Lösung des Konflikts, der Ursache dieses Flüchtlingsstroms. Und die Befassung damit muss stattfinden durch die UNO und auch durch den Sicherheitsrat. Alle Länder, alle internationalen Organisationen sind gefordert, einschließlich der Arabischen Liga. Wichtig ist auch die Hilfe vor Ort. Es kann doch nicht sein, dass die UNO zu wenig Geld zur Unterstützung der Flüchtlinge vor Ort hat. Jordanien und die Türkei leisten bereits Außerordentliches. Es ist also die Weltgemeinschaft, wir alle, wir sind gefordert, rasch, sehr rasch zu reagieren. Es gibt einfach keine Zeit mehr, lange Diskussionen zu führen. Wir müssen reagieren. Dankeschön.
Merci, madame. La parole est maintenant à madame Abramikine et madame Deboseva se prépare.
Merci beaucoup. Dear fellow parliamentarians, during yesterday's debate, our Russian colleagues have presented their recipe on how to improve the world. And I must say that our Mongolian hosts demonstrate the best way to do that. They start from themselves. Lithuanian delegation is deeply impressed by the continuous endeavors in strengthening democracy in this respective country. This could serve as a good example for other OSCE member states. At the same time, yesterday we heard accusations that the USA is behaving badly while seeking exclusiveness. But I have a suggestion to my Russian colleagues. Do make Russia exclusive. So little is required for that. Just stop. Just stop your war against Ukraine. Just withdraw your war machinery from that country and restore its territorial integrity. Let us realize the principle of the free movement of parliamentarians by releasing those Ukrainian MPs kept in Russian prisons. First of all, Nadia Savchenko. Just stop threatening of your neighbors and persecuting your political opponents. Allow real democratic elections in Russia. Step away from your imperialist policies and start restoring trust among nations. It could easily help Russia to become really the most exclusive member of the OSCE, and we all would very much welcome that. However, so far, we see different actions and strategies. Therefore, the lessons of morality from Kremlin do not sound sincere. At the end, on behalf of the entire delegation of Lithuania, allow me to express my deepest respect and gratitude for the really exclusive hospitality to the Mongolian delegation and all Mongolian government. All the best for you, dear fellow Mongolian parliamentarians. All the best for all your nation. Thank you.
Merci, madame. La parole est maintenant à madame Ivana Dobesova et que madame Mikkelsen se prépare.
Thank you for the floor. I am not sure that I can press in 2 minutes this biggest problem which we try to solve
madame.
here, but I try my best. On behalf of the Czech delegation, I would like to express my opinion on migration topic. We are facing an unprecedented migration crisis in Europe, which could change our continent forever. According to UN Refugee Agency, about 4,000 migrants have flooded into Europe in the year 2015. The largest share of them, around 300, have crossed the Aegean Sea to Greek islands off the coast of Turkey. These migrants, in majority, are not arriving from a war zone. These people are coming to Europe from Turkey, which offers them safe haven irrespective of their race, creed, culture, or language. From an international inspections visit to these refugee camps, we know that Turkish authorities are doing a great job, and their attitude towards migrants, refugees, asylum seekers, and people under temporary protection is excellent. Personally, I would like to praise Turkey for its extraordinary performance in tackling the migration issue, but we should help Turkey and other Syrian neighborhoods hosting Syrian refugees with extra funds to be able to handle this migration crisis. At the same time, I would like to say that I fully understand the problems of countries like Greece, Italy, Cyprus, and also Hungary and others, because they are the first countries accepting the biggest wave of migrants. In this respect, I am pleased to inform you that in January 2015, the Czech government approved a program to help refugees in their home regions. It plans to earmark up to 4 million euros annually within the program. However, we must clearly distinguish 2 categories of immigrants: refugees fleeing from war conflicts and economical migrants. And majority of these immigrants are mostly not arriving from a war zone. They are not coming to Europe to find safe haven, but to have a better life, for example, in Germany. That means that main part of these migrants should be handled as economical migrants. In this situation of the grave migration crisis, Europe should stand together and find common solution for this crisis. We need to secure the fulfillment of legal obligation by all member states concerning
conclure,
the rigorous implement of these current asylum seekers. We not allow
Merci,
to
Madame.
all of them
La parole est Madame
placement in Europe.
Mikkelsen.
Thank you for your attention.
Merci, Madame. La parole est à Madame Mikkelsen et Lord Peter Bones se prépare.
Thank you, Chair. In this timely and important discussion, I would like to address the need to respect political pluralism to avoid a shift from one authoritarian regime to another in transition processes. Too often, even in some OSCE states, we see a negative political climate that lacks the respect and cooperation necessary between different political parties and opinions. Too often, we see that political opponents are suppressed, arrested, and silenced. Too often, we see that terrorists and extremists misuse the vacuum of power at the start of transition process. And too often, we see one authoritarian regime falls, another authoritarian regime replace it. How can we make sure that democratic forces are allowed to prosper in the beginning of transition process from dictatorship to democracy? How can we make sure that people with true democratic intentions and not Islamic extremists or other political extremists gain power in transition states? I believe regional parliamentary cooperation, like ours, are of utmost importance in this regard. We need to continuously promote secular values and principles, such as respect for human rights, democracy, and rule of law. Our challenge, however, is how we can reach out in our dialogue to all political opponents and not only the representatives of the incumbents. I believe a fruitful and vibrant political debate between different opinion holders leads to an open and engaging society that brings our societies forward. On the contrary, I believe that suppression of political opinions lead to radicalization and unrest in our societies. We see this has happened in the Middle East and some northern African states. And the consequences of it are unprecedented, not only for the states themselves, but also for Europe and the OSCE, as we see hundreds of thousands of people fleeing into our countries to find peace. Worryingly, we see similar developments arising in some OSCE states recently. We must remember, as is written in the Council of Europe documents, every country has a government. Only democracies have an opposition. A parliament cannot function well without a respect and respectful opposition. Thank you, Chair.
Merci, Madame. La parole est maintenant à Lord Peter Bones et Madame Kozlova se prépare.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. President. This afternoon's session was to be about a number of different issues, but we are now concentrating on the refugee crisis. And I think it's important to note that there are two elements to that. The first aspect is the long-term element of endeavoring to provide a secure home for people in their own countries so that they do not need to become refugees. And that will involve establishing peace and financial and technical aid and establishing democracy and good government. The second element is short-term. And however much we want to concentrate on the first, we cannot ignore the short-term crisis which has arisen in so many countries in Europe. We have to be grateful to Germany for the lead and the actions it's taken. And my personal view is that it is a European problem and all of us have to make our contribution. Aside from assistance to the refugees themselves, smaller and less well-off countries faced with this unprecedented situation need not just money, but logistical and administrative support. And it's just too easy to condemn countries in this situation for not responding precisely as we might like them to do in an ideal world. Lastly, Mr. President, I don't think we in this Assembly or elsewhere pay enough attention to rule of law itself. We talk about democracy. A state may have many elections, but these do not deliver human rights. They don't deliver the sound economic base from which only comes with a sound legal system. Do we concentrate enough on helping countries train their judiciary, ensuring they don't have a corrupt judiciary, ensuring that the judiciary are independent? Mr. President, we believe in many things, but they cannot be delivered without a sound rule of law. We believe in a sound international rule of law also, which of course is why the vast majority of us here have condemned Russia for their actions in Ukraine. Thank you very much indeed.
Merci, Monsieur Lord Bowness. Maintenant, nous passons la parole à Madame Kozlova et Monsieur Vysotsky se prépare.
Коллеги, внимательно прослушав выступления, касающиеся нарушения прав и кризиса в Украине, у меня сложилось впечатление, что многие из выступающих не знают истинное положение дел. Поэтому и говорят только о Крыме, а не обо всей Украине. Я имею в виду и Донецкую, и Луганскую области. И не замечают, что там нарушены права жителей. Гибнут люди, дети, разрушаются города и только потому, что жители попросили автономию в составе Украины. Повторяю, в составе Украины. Россия обвиняет в нарушении Минских соглашений. Киев не считает себя виновным в развязывании гражданской войны в своей стране. И опять в семье разлад, а виноваты соседи, конечно же, Россия. Вдруг неожиданно бомбежки прекратились. И только потому, что прекратил их Киев, который разрушал свои же области, а не Россия. Почему здесь не говорят об отчетах мониторинговой миссии ОБСЕ, в которых отмечено, что обстрелы и их в том числе велись со стороны Украины? Это не наши данные, а, повторяю, данные мониторинговой миссии ОБСЕ. Почему накладываются санкции на людей в России и не осуждают тех, кто совершил неконституционный переворот в Украине? Теперь что, все народы, кому не нравятся их президенты, могут таким путем с одобрения ОБСЕ решать вопросы? Почему мы не осуждаем и не видим причины, по которым дестабилизировалась обстановка в Сирии, Ливане, Ираке? Из согласия одной заокеанской страны, желающей указывать всем странам, как жить. Давайте же будем справедливыми и не будем нагнетать обстановку. От этого ситуация только ухудшается. Надо прекратить взаимные обвинения и подумать, как сделать так, чтобы ситуация разрешилась, чтобы не нарушались права людей, чтобы не гибли люди, дети. А в Киеве должны понять, что нет страны, кроме России, более желающей ей добра, что подтверждается историей наших отношений, многолетних. В заключение обращаюсь ко всем парламентариям. Я надеюсь на ваш профессионализм и приверженность основным принципам такой уважаемой организации, как Парламентская ассамблея ОБСЕ, и на то, что в дальнейшем наше взаимодействие продолжится, а взаимопонимание увеличится. И как представитель одной из самых гуманных специальностей, я врач-педиатр, пожелаю вам здоровья. Ибо, как сказали мудрецы, здоровье – это не все, но все без здоровья – ничто.
Merci. Merci. C'est vrai que c'est très important. Maintenant, la parole est à Monsieur Vysotsky et Monsieur Sanchez-Armor se prépare.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Mongolian Parliament, for this genuine hospitality. I would like to give many thanks to our hosts. Reacting to Russia and to its statements about some local conflict and a Ukrainian army that killed children in Donbass, okay, I will not state any Ukrainian documents. I will not state even OSCE resolutions that we passed during last 1.5 years. I have by myself the latest report, 11th report of the Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine by the United Nations. It is stated clearly, I will quote, "The situation in Ukraine continued to be marred by ongoing armed hostiles in some areas of Donetsk and Lugansk regions, reportedly fueled by the presence and continuing influx of foreign fighters and sophisticated weapons and ammunition from the Russian Federation." So, is it a local conflict? I would ask my Russian colleagues. Is it Russia that offer us some peace and some friendship. Nevertheless, as we all said yesterday and today and always, Ukraine is fully committed to the Minsk agreement. Mr. Hollande and Chancellor Merkel had agreed that the latest changes in Ukrainian constitution in the field of decentralization is ongoing implementing of Ukraine commitments to the Minsk agreements. What do we see from the Russia side? Thank you, Lithuania, thank you, Georgia, thank other delegation that all, Estonia that mentioned Mr. Sentsov, Mrs. Savchenko, Kolchenko, and other detainees in Russia. I would like to stress that by the Minsk agreement, Russia must free our hostages. We consider Mr. Sentsov, he was detained for 20 years, Mr. Kolchenko, Mrs. Savchenko, the parliamentarian of Ukraine, political hostages that must be released. It's a fully written in Minsk agreement. We don't see any commitments from Russia for this side. Also, the situation of the human rights in Crimea and the rights of Crimean Tatars. I see by myself this report from the United Nations Human Rights Monitoring Mission. What we see about Crimea? The de facto authorities. I don't understand.
Et je passe la parole à Monsieur Sanchez Armor.
Okay, thank you.
Et Monsieur Lombardi se prépare.
Sí, gracias, señor presidente. Ayer oímos un relato del presidente de la Duma rusa sobre la crisis ucraniana que era asombroso. Al parecer, la única participación de Rusia ha sido acoger 1 millón de refugiados. La ventaja de tener aquí a los colegas rusos, como todos defendimos en Helsinki, es poder decirles que la mejor manera de evitar tener 1 millón de refugiados es no crear situaciones que provocan 1 millón de refugiados. Y a los refugiados quiero referirme, porque la cuestión de los refugiados tiene que ver con mi responsabilidad como representante especial para fronteras, y la cuestión de los refugiados es en la frontera. Miren, por favor, esa infografía. Esta es la revista The Economist. Son las verjas físicas que se han construido o se están construyendo en todo el mundo. Vamos a una política de fronteras diferente de la que hemos conocido en los últimos decenios. Vamos a una refronterización del mundo, a una militarización de las fronteras. Una de esas fronteras es la frontera serbo-húngara, que yo visité en marzo de 2014, precisamente en el punto de Orgos, que está en todas las televisiones del mundo hoy por el conflicto de ayer. En el Standing Committee último de Viena hablé de la frontera serbo-húngara y en aquel caso eran refugiados kosovares. Unos meses después, la situación sigue siendo de conflicto en esa frontera, pero con una novedad. Hay una verja y ahora ha habido ayer violencia, por primera vez violencia, entre los peticionarios de asilo y fuerzas de seguridad. Eso no se va a parar, esa corriente de desesperación no se va a parar y la OSCE tiene que preguntarse qué puede hacer como organización. Por supuesto, una reunión específica de la que se ha hablado esta mañana, por supuesto, poner toda nuestra experiencia en manejo de crisis al servicio de esta situación, y quiero recordar a todos los colegas que tenemos un centro especializado en formación de personal de control de fronteras, la Academia de Dushanbe, en Tayikistán, que la OSCE debe poner al servicio de la formación de todo el personal de fronteras de la zona OSCE para que manejen la situación de refugiados.
Monsieur Sanchez.
Gracias.
La parole est maintenant à Monsieur Lombardi et Monsieur Adjiani de Chypre se prépare.
In these days, emotions dominate the world, also our debate today. It's right so, because apparently only emotions can move us to responsibility and solidarity. It is our duty to give answers, to give hospitality, to give support to those flying from massacres and war. But we have to go beyond emotions. We know that solidarity is just the short-term answer to the emergency. It is clear that solidarity cannot be imposed on the others. It has to come from inside of each of us, of each of our countries, if we don't want to get negative reactions on a longer term. Also, as responsible politicians, we have to ask ourselves, what is the long-term response to the crisis? The goal of international solidarity cannot be to empty the countries of origin of refugees and just move millions of people from one region to another. Everyone has the right to life and security, it's very clear, but primarily has the right to live in its own country. And every country has the right to have and build a future for its children, not just to send them away. As responsible politicians, we also have to look behind the emergency. What are the reasons of this emergency? Who has been destabilizing since years these regions, and why? Finally, as responsible politicians, we have to look for solution, for long-term solution to the crisis. So we have to really push and support, and this can be a task for the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, to support all attempts for dialogue involving all regional countries and all Western and Eastern powers in order to get finally on talks which can give solution for these countries. There are attempts now to organize such a dialogue, including Turkey, including Iran, including Russia. We believe this is the right way if we want to give a long-term answer and not just react on the short term.
La parole est maintenant à M. Adjiani et M. Cengiz Zalan se préparent.
Die Verhandlungen über die Lösung der Zypernfrage haben ein Momentum erzeugt. Unsere Erwartungen für die Wiederherstellung der Menschenrechte der Flüchtlinge haben sich erneuert. Leider die Grundrechte in meinem Land werden weiter von der Türkei verletzt, trotz der Entscheidung des Europäischen Gerichtshofes für Menschenrechte. Zum Beispiel über die Verletzung von Menschenrechten der eingeschlossenen Leute in Garpasia Area und die Rechte der vermissten Personen und ihrer Verwandten. Ich lade die Türkei bei diesem Momentum teilzunehmen. Die Türkei hat den Schlüssel für die Lösung der Zypernfrage. Ohne die Türkei hat die türkische Armee von Zypern entfernen können. Wozu braucht 50.000 Soldaten in einem EU-Land zu stationieren? Die Parlamentarische Versammlung muss die Verhandlungen begrüßen und hoffen auf ein friedliches Ergebnis. Wir Parlamentarier begrüßen das gemeinsame Traum für Frieden von den zwei Leadern auf der Insel, Mr. Anastasiadi und Mr. Akizi. Vertrauensbildende Maßnahmen sollte die Türkei gleich treffen, um ihren Lösungswille zu beweisen. Eine solche Maßnahme ist die Zurückgabe von Geisterstadt Famagusta zu ihren Einwohnern. Flüchtlinge. Es gibt heutzutage ein riesiges Problem mit der Bewegung von Menschen, meistens wegen des Krieges in Syrien und Middle East. Die Bewegung von Menschen findet wegen des gewalttätigen Verhaltens von ISIS statt. Die Menschen haben Angst um das Leben und für ihre Würde. Deswegen laufen mit jedem Mittel weg, um sich zu retten. Der Verfolgte bevorzugt, sich ins Wasser zum Mittelmeer zu ertrinken, anstatt enthauptet zu werden. Wir, die Abgeordneten, wobei dreimal jährlich sich treffen für Konfliktlösungen, auch bei dieser Krise zu finden, stehen wir schwach gegenüber dieser Aggressivität. Wir debattieren meistens theoretisch und manchmal haben wir keine umfassenden Informationen, worum es in Wirklichkeit geht, und wir kennen nicht die tatsächlichen Umstände und Voraussetzungen dieser Krise. In den letzten 2 Jahren beschäftigen wir uns mit der syrischen und indirekt mit der Aggressivität Benehmen von ISIS. ISIS hat Befürchtung, Terror, Panik geübt. ISIS hat die sozioökonomische Katastrophe verursacht für die Leute, die nicht ISIS-Prinzipien folgen. Meistens für Leute anderer Religionen. Zerstörung, Enthauptungen, zerstört Kulturgedanken, zerstört menschliche Werte. Mit einer unglaublichen Art und Weise und Gewalt. ISIS setzt ihre Wille durch. Von der anderen Seite, leider, ISIS hat sich zu einem Modell geworden, islamistische Revolution, bei der Millionen von Leuten islamischer Abstammung in vielen Ländern von Middle East und Afrikas. ISIS hat sich als die Hoffnung für viele Menschen angesehen.
Monsieur Adjiani, il faut conclure.
Sogar andere extremistische Organisationen benutzen die gleiche oder ähnliche Strategie, um sich in der Gesellschaft durchzusetzen. Das Phänomen ISIS kann sich in weiteren und anderen Regionen des südlichen Mittelmeers erscheinen und verbreiten mit unvorhergesehenen
Non, Monsieur Adjiani, vous n'avez plus la parole. La parole est à Monsieur Zalan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear colleagues, Hungary has the obligation to protect the Schengen external borders of the EU. If we fail to do so, then we see the consequences. In only 1 week's time, Germany and other countries have reintroduced the border control because 5,000–10,000 persons have crossed the border illegally daily, without any control or registration. It is understandable that this is a security threat for all countries involved. The protection of the borders does not mean that the closing out of everybody who wants to come in. It means that the borders can only be crossed legally. So if real refugees arrive to the Hungarian border, then they have the possibility to apply for refugee status for Hungary at the border, and those who get this status will be able to enter the country. In compliance with European rules, they have to register and give their fingerprints. It is Hungary's firm standpoint that instead of closing the internal borders, we have to protect the external border so that the free movement within the European community can remain. Only real refugees should have the possibility to enter the Schengen area after registration. It is not fair to tell people to come to Europe because not all of them entitled for asylum, so they will not be able to stay. Many who are not refugees must go back. It is better to say in advance that they should stay in the first safe country and should not put their lives at risk and give their last money to human traffickers. What should be the solution? Protect the external Schengen borders in first line in Greece with a common EU effort so that no migrants can enter without registration.
Merci, Monsieur Jalan. La parole est maintenant à Monsieur Čomić de la Serbie. Et Monsieur Bizet se prépare.
Excuse me.
Thank you.
Instead of... Oh, sorry.
There is one sentence that I share whenever there is a context of refugee crisis within Europe, and that sentence is, don't stop the refugees, stop the war. No violence to refugees, no walls towards refugees, no hostility and hatred, but let's deal with the war. And I will share with you briefly differences between refugee crisis in my country, former Yugoslavia, back in the beginning of the 90s and nowadays. Then we knew who is bad guy, who is nice guy. Maybe we knew. And in 3 waves during 3 years, Serbia accepted 500,000 refugees. They were not seen clearly. Now we see refugees, and now we don't really see clearly who are the bad guys and who are the good guys. But we see walls, and we see dark side of what we thought was forgotten among human beings within a civilized world. We see someone, somewhere, a lot of people everywhere using the same sentences, the same lies, the same propaganda as it used to be 70 or 80 years ago within Europe. If you use something like fascist, then sooner or later there will be some fascism. And we don't want that to happen. So that's why I share with you, shame on everyone who wants to discriminate refugees, and blame to everyone who wants to stop the refugees and not the war, wherever the war may happen. Thank you.
Merci, Madame Čomić. La parole est à Monsieur Jean Bizet et que Monsieur Azopardi de Malte se prépare.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. À propos de cette crise migratoire qui frappe actuellement l'Europe, et au-delà de l'émotion, permettez-moi quelques propositions afin de conduire à de vraies solutions. Tout d'abord, Schengen. Les accords de Schengen sont au cœur de l'esprit et de la construction européenne, en y ayant institué au fil du temps la libre circulation des personnes au sein même de cet espace des 26 États. Ces accords doivent être appliqués rigoureusement. Autrement dit, quand il y a une menace grave pour l'ordre public ou la sécurité intérieure, ces accords prévoient des mesures exceptionnelles de rétablissement du contrôle aux frontières sur une période transitoire de 30 jours. L'afflux de réfugiés auxquels les pays d'Europe centrale et l'Allemagne ont à faire face, de par son ampleur et non de par sa nature, constitue bien une menace de désordre qu'il faut maîtriser. L'appel à l'accueil des migrants lancé par l'Allemagne a constitué un véritable appel d'air qui s'est transformé en 48 heures tout simplement en courant d'air. Mais fermer les frontières ne constitue pas en soi une vraie politique. Il faut donc parallèlement d'autres mesures. Tout d'abord, organiser des centres d'identification et d'enregistrement à la périphérie de l'espace Schengen et pourquoi pas, avec l'appui des monarchies du Golfe, qui sont, je dirais, particulièrement absentes en la matière, ces centres d'identification et d'enregistrement pourraient nous permettre d'y instituer l'amélioration des conditions de vie et de sécurité, en y accordant également une aide alimentaire, démontrant ainsi la générosité et l'humanisme de l'Union, en y vérifiant ceux qui ont vocation à rentrer dans l'Union, c'est-à-dire les réfugiés de guerre, et en refusant les réfugiés économiques. Ces réfugiés de guerre auront vocation à retourner dans leur pays d'origine après la fin des conflits. Enfin, il faut rappeler la pertinence de l'Union pour la Méditerranée, cette politique qui a pour but de créer du développement économique en zone Méditerranée pour permettre à ces jeunes hommes et femmes d'y engager leur avenir professionnel. Cette politique n'a jamais été réellement mise en œuvre. Ceci suppose, et c'est le plus difficile, de pacifier ces pays aujourd'hui en plein chaos. C'est la raison pour laquelle je souhaite que nous répondions à l'appel de la Russie.
Azopardi et Madame Paloniemi de Finlande se prépare. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In July this year in Helsinki, we as OSCE member states celebrated the 40th anniversary of the Helsinki Final Act. Article 18 of this act states that everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience and religion, and freedom either alone or in the community with others and in the public or private to manifest his religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship and observance. Human beings possess the right to religion freedom from the very fact that they are human, and such freedom is essential to their being truly human in all respects. Human dignity demands freedom in matters of conscience, otherwise truly human acting and living is impossible. Particularly worrisome is the fact that in various parts of the OSCE area, there are growing instances where religious intolerance and discrimination continue to leave their mark on societies, with the result that these thoughts are threatening the security in the region. Moreover, the OSCE area, we are even experiencing situations where national and local authorities remind Christians that in their private life they can believe whatever they like, but they cannot profess their beliefs in public. It is of vital importance to understand that freedom of religion and freedom of ideas are meaningless without the freedom of expression. On the other hand, freedom of expression doesn't mean freedom to disregard and disrespect others. Religious freedom means tolerance on a personal, local and national level. Moreover, this should not be guaranteed only in Western countries. The same should be done in other countries where Christianity is not always tolerated or even permitted. In conclusion, Mr. Chair, I hope that we, as OSCE member states, continue to foster the essential value that interreligious dialogue, interreligious social contacts, especially in voluntary work, are the keystone of the promotion of understanding and tolerance between people of different religions.
Mr. Chair,
Around the world, millions of people are trapped in a modern form of slavery called human trafficking. A typical victim of human trafficking is an adult woman, as around half of the total number are women. However, there is a reduction in the number of women, which is partially offset by the increasing detection of girls. Girls comprise around 1/5 of the total number of detected victims worldwide. The trend of increasing amount of younger victims is devastating. Worldwide, 1 in 3 known victims is a child. It is a 5% increase from 5 years back statistics. Children and their families are often tempted by the promise of education, better employment, or a more prosperous life far from their homes. Sometimes children see no alternative but exploitation for survival. Trafficking in persons is driven by gender inequality, the absence of equal opportunity, steep intra- and interstate economic disparities, corruption and vulnerability due to failing judicial and law enforcement systems, civil instability, and the failure of states to protect and provide for their citizens. I regard OSCE's efforts in combating human trafficking very valuable. For instance, giving technical assistance to governments on updating migration strategy and an anti-trafficking action plan is very important. What I would like to emphasize is that we must affect both the supply and demand when taking measures on preventing human trafficking. That will cover very wide-ranging legislation, such as laws on immigration, labor, health, prostitution, and child protection. They must be reviewed and amended to cover all aspects of trafficking. And since trafficking in persons is a global problem that transcends national boundaries, it requires transnational policies that engage international cooperation through information exchange and mutual assistance. Thank you so much.
La parole maintenant à Monsieur De Rouver. Monsieur De Rouver, vous avez la parole.
Merci. First, I would like, as many participants already did, to thank the Mongolian organizers for the professional but also warm welcome we get here. As we are talking now about human rights and as the asylum crisis in Europe is manifestly present in the debates here, I want to draw the attention to the situation of the most affected refugees, those who reside in the camps on the borders of Syria and Iraq, or even in Syria and Iraq. 9 out of 10 refugees live in these camps today, so that is a big majority. As you know, they live today in very poor conditions, with lack of commodities in general and food in particular. I want to warn that the asylum crisis should not be misused as a pretext, an argument to forget these most vulnerable refugees for war, violence, and religious intolerance in the camps in the region. The advantage for all of us and for all of them, if we do not forget them, is obvious. I regret that they are not mentioned in the joint statement of the 3 political groups that is done today. We stress the importance not to forget them, as we seem to make the mistake to focus only on those refugees who can reach the European territory. If we, as members of parliament, all make an effort to push our governments to do a bit more, as they do today, as our government recently did, this meeting would be an enormous success and could effectively improve the conditions of life of many thousands of refugees in the regions who risk to be forgotten today. Thank you.
Merci. Maintenant, la parole est à Monsieur Beckvold de la Norvège et Monsieur Claudio Fava de l'Italie se prépare.
Thank you, Chair. Of course, this assembly, we are represent a different political party, and I see that different political party have different solution to the huge humanitarian crisis that we see in Europe. But in my point of view, we need to take the responsibility for humanity. We are experiencing the worst humanitarian crisis in our continent since the Second World War. People are dying every day in numbers that I'm not able to comprehend. People are fleeing from war and terror in masses that our generation has never seen before. And these people are our fellow human beings, and let us treat them as such. Let us meet them in a way that allows them dignity and possibilities. The majority of people in Europe want to do this. They want to welcome the refugees in a dignified manner. Yet, we as political leaders of our country hesitate. We argue about numbers, we argue about money, we engage in blame games. We must stop it and act responsibly. We as parliamentarians must put pressure on our government to act. The OSCE family, including America, need to share responsibility. All nations, east or west, need to welcome the refugees, and the whole of Europe need to stand together in this period of unprecedented humanitarian disaster. Finally, I'm tired to listen to politicians who always speak about our fellow human beings as burdens. If we view them as a burden, they will become a burden. These are humans, and the vast majority of those who reached Europe are well-educated and resourceful people, people who can help our continent grow and prosper. And this is what I think is the way we need to welcome them. This is the way we shall treat fellow humans. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Begvold. La parole est à Monsieur Claudio Fava et que Monsieur Guy Tessier de la France se prépare.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Accade quando si discute di principi generali sui diritti umani di essere spesso tutti d'accordo. Credo che invece ci si debba concentrare su ciò che ci divide perché questa discussione sia più efficace. Mi permetta di inserire un tema su cui non ci siamo soffermati, che è quello della libertà di stampa. La relazione annuale del segretario generale del Consiglio d'Europa del maggio di quest'anno ci dice che la protezione dei diritti umani oggi è più debole di quanto fosse alla fine della guerra fredda e un presupposto di questa debolezza è la scarsa rilevanza della libertà di stampa e della protezione dei diritti collegati alla libertà di stampa. Credo che l'OSCE non faccia abbastanza, signor Presidente, per denunciare limiti, violenze, censure all'informazione e ai giornalisti. Vorrei ricordare che il Comitato di protezione dei giornalisti l'anno scorso ha censito 221 detenzioni arbitrarie. Di questi 221 giornalisti incarcerati, 21 sono stati incarcerati in paesi dell'OSCE. Mi sarei aspettato che per ciascuno di questi giornalisti ci fosse una parola forte e ferma, una presa di posizione, un atto politico da parte dell'OSCE e così non è stato. Quest'anno ci sono già stati 45 giornalisti uccisi, 12 in paesi dell'OSCE. L'ultimo report della Commissione antimafia del mio paese ci ricorda che ogni 2 giorni vengono minacciati o subiscono violenze 3 giornalisti. Ecco, di fronte a tutto questo, di fronte anche alla precarietà con cui spesso si esercita questo mestiere freelance, senza garanzie economiche né editoriali, servono strumenti nuovi sul piano legislativo, ma serve anche presenza politica da parte di organizzazioni internazionali. Allora mi permetta di suggerire 2 cose: che ci sia un monitoraggio e una denuncia costante da parte dell'OSCE nei confronti delle violazioni della libertà di stampa e dei giornalisti che subiscono violenze e minacce, e che si possa immaginare anche una risoluzione su cui questa Assemblea si possa impegnare nel prossimo futuro. Grazie.
Merci, Monsieur Fava. La parole est à Monsieur Tessier et Madame Olga Alimova de la Russie se prépare.
Merci, cher Président. Mes chers collègues, je souhaiterais attirer l'attention de notre Assemblée sur un sujet éminemment humain. Il s'agit de l'horrible sort des minorités religieuses et particulièrement des chrétiens d'Orient. Ces minorités, il faut le citer tant qu'elles existent encore, sont les chrétiens d'Orient, mais aussi les yézidis du Kurdistan irakien, les Kurdes de Kobané ou encore les Shabaks ou les Mandéens. Ces populations subissent des vexations quotidiennes, des discriminations et l'oppression est grande. Elles sont victimes de viols, sont dénoncées, pourchassées, emprisonnées, torturées, assassinées. Tous les moyens sont utilisés pour les contraindre à renier leur foi. Elles ne peuvent plus célébrer leur culte. Les églises sont brûlées, les cimetières sont profanés. Et c'est au Moyen-Orient, là même où le christianisme a pris naissance, que la situation est la plus grave. Aujourd'hui, il n'y a plus d'autre choix que la fuite. Avant le début du conflit en 2011, les chrétiens étaient 1 800 000 en Syrie. Depuis 4 ans, 700 000 ont fui le pays, soit 40% de la communauté. Il ne reste que 400 000 chrétiens en Irak, contre environ 1 500 000 en 2003. Pour le pape François, ils sont les martyrs de notre temps. Ce n'est qu'à l'occasion de la récente conférence internationale de Paris, rassemblant une 60aine de pays, coprésidée par la France et la Jordanie, consacrée aux minorités persécutées au Moyen-Orient, dans les zones contrôlées par Daesh, particulièrement en Irak et en Syrie, que le drame qui se déroule depuis plusieurs années, dans la quasi-indifférence générale, a pu bénéficier d'un léger éclairage médiatique. De cette conférence est né un plan d'action articulé autour de 3 axes humanitaires, judiciaires et politiques. Je le rappelle, nous sommes bien en présence d'un génocide sur lequel la communauté internationale n'a ouvert les yeux que trop tard. Il faut également se rendre à l'évidence. Ce plan d'action ne pourra être mis en œuvre tant qu'il n'existera pas d'unité d'action internationale et que les intérêts de la Russie, de l'Iran, de l'Arabie saoudite et des monarchies du Golfe seront contradictoires. Ce plan d'action souhaiterait également que ces minorités restent sur leur terre d'origine. Nous en sommes tous d'accord, mais sans l'anéantissement de Daesh et des terroristes, cela ne sera pas possible. Il faut donc s'attaquer aux origines du mal et pas aux conséquences. Évidemment que les chrétiens d'Orient persécutés fuient et se dirigent principalement vers leurs pays voisins, le Liban, la Turquie et la Jordanie, tous les 3 pratiquant la tolérance religieuse. En outre, comment leur demander de rester sur place alors que l'Europe accueille d'autres réfugiés? Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
La parole est à Madame Alimova et Monsieur Atissi de la Turquie se prépare.
Уважаемый член парламентской ассамблеи ОБСЕ, от имени мониторинговой группы России по изучению нарушений прав детей на Украине хочу сообщить следующее. Мировое сообщество по-прежнему дает противоречивые оценки событиям, происходящим на юго-востоке Украины, где не один год практически идут непрерывные боевые действия. Однако никакими разночтениями не может быть оправдана гибель детей и нарушение их фундаментальных прав. Вне зависимости от того, какую из противоборствующих сторон считать правой, мы обязаны встать на сторону наиболее беззащитной и ни в чем не провинившейся категории граждан детей. Нарушение прав детей, находящихся в зоне конфликта, носит систематический характер и продолжается вопреки Минским договоренностям. Приведу лишь один пример. В результате обстрела военными частных домов на окраине Шахтерска тяжелую увечья получил 9-летний Ваня Воронов, который лишился 2 ног, правой руки, получил массу других травм, повреждены глаза. Его 5-летний брат Тимофей погиб. Подобных случаев сотни. Людям приходится привыкать к жизни в бомбоубежищах и подвалах, к тесноте, сырости, холоду, антисанитарии, потому что любой выход на улицу смертельно опасен. По данным ЮНИСЕФ, около 700 тысяч жителей Донбасса, в том числе дети, нуждаются в чистой питьевой воде. Еще 35 тысяч человек необходимы нормальные санитарные условия. В результате военного конфликта обучение в школах прервали почти 25 тысяч детей. Многие дети на протяжении нескольких месяцев не выходят из бункеров, где прячутся от снарядов. Дети простужены, требуется лечение, реабилитация, отдых детей и нормальное питание. Гуманитарная помощь, которая приходит из России, и помощь от Коммунистической партии Российской Федерации не в силах решить всю эту проблему накопившуюся, хотя и прилагаются усилия. Нет и не может быть оправданий массовому нарушению прав детей, закрепленных в международных правовых актах, которые Украина ратифицирована. И необходимо, чтобы теперь это было выполнение не на словах, а на деле. Все факты нарушения граждан, особенно детей, ОБСЕ и правозащитные организации должны максимально вести мониторинг, заставлять Украину неукоснительно соблюдать режим прекращения огня и иных пунктов Минских соглашений. Дети должны быть вне политики. Детям нужен мир. И это важнейшая задача для всего мирового сообщества. Спасибо.
Merci, Madame Alimova. La parole est à Monsieur Atissi de la Turquie et Monsieur Askan, Madame Askan de l'Autriche se prépare.
Thank you. Dear friends, I'd like to underline our concerns about freedom of media in Turkey. Media is considered as fourth force in democracy in addition to legislation, administration, and judiciary. and separation of powers is essential in democracy. If any of these forces is not independent, then democracy is considered under threat. Media may be threatened but politically and economically. If publishers are arrested or press companies are squeezed economically by the government, it is impossible to talk about freedom of media. Concerns on media freedom are increasing nowadays in Turkey. All people who are not happy with this situation are combining their forces to restore freedom of media in Turkey. Religious tolerance is another point of concern in Turkey. Although everyone can practice their religion freely in Turkey, only Sunni Islam is supported by government in last years. More concern is gathering on the use of religion politically. Religious issues must be excluded from election campaigns. All governments in the world must tolerate all kinds of religions and support all religions equally when needed. Thank you very much.
Merci. La parole est maintenant à Madame Aslan et Monsieur Mercica de Malte se prépare.
Herzlichen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender. Ich möchte Sie an zwei Sachen erinnern. Erstens mal an die größten Verliererinnen und Verlierer der Kriege, die Mädchen und Frauen. Erinnern, wie Sie wissen, wurden letztes Jahr von IS Tausende christliche, turkmenische, kurdische, jesidische Frauen von IS entführt und massenvergewaltigt. Und die internationale Gemeinschaft hat bis dato noch nichts dazu beigetragen. Und ich finde, das ist eine Schande für die Menschheit, weil es ständig immer wieder von Menschenrechten gesprochen wird, aber nie die Frauenrechte sozusagen in den Kriegsdiskussionen und auch in den Flüchtlingsdiskussionen mit hineinbezogen werden. Und ich denke, wenn die internationale Gemeinschaft nicht in der Lage war, diese Frauen von Boko Haram oder diese entführten Frauen von IS aufzufinden und auch sie zu betreuen, haben sie immer noch die Möglichkeit, genau diese Staaten in die Pflicht zu ziehen, die genau bei diesen Verbrechen gegen die Menschlichkeit, die genau bei diesen Massenvergewaltigungen zugeschaut haben, die nichts dazu gemacht haben, die das ganze Verbrechen geduldet haben, die können immer noch gegen diese Staaten vorgehen. Die können diese Staaten ratifizieren und wirklich auch zur Rechenschaft ziehen. Und bis jetzt ist das leider immer noch nicht passiert. Und wenn wir schon bei den Flüchtlingen sind, gibt es immer noch die Möglichkeit, dass eben diese von Gewalt betroffene Frauen und Mädchen zumindest geschützte Unterkünfte bekommen, damit man sie zusätzlich schützt, damit sie nicht Suizid begehen, damit sie auch von ihrer eigenen Gesellschaft auch nicht diskriminiert und ausgegrenzt werden. Ja, und ich will Sie noch eine zweite Sache erinnern, und zwar an das Bild von Alan Kurdi. Alan Kurdi, der kleine Junge, der einfach uns alle sehr berührte, er ist ein Opfer der internationalen Politik. Das ist für uns alle wahrnehmbar, muss für uns alle auch akzeptierbar sein, dass wir die Verantwortung über dieses Elend, über dieses Porträt auch tragen. Eine Politik, die nicht in der Lage war, Friedenskonzepte zu entwickeln, eine Politik, die bei Kriegen weggeschaut hat und sich dann über Flüchtlinge aufgeregt hat, eine Politik, die nicht in der Lage war, diese Krisengebiete
Merci, Madame Aslan. La parole est maintenant à Monsieur Mercica de Malte et Madame Fatolini de l'Italie se prépare.
Thank you. In view of the current migration crisis, I would like to point out two issues. Firstly, we as politicians should never forget the duties we have towards humanity. The OSCE is an organization of shared values, but currently we also have shared responsibilities. Refugees are people running away from war, running away from death. They have no choice, but it's their own hope to live. This is a global issue and not just a European challenge. No state can look away, as this issue is a ripple effect, either directly or indirectly, on all of us. No wall or fence will stop this phenomenon. In the future, we'll be judged, and our actions or lack of them will be recorded. Secondly, we should not discard the worry or fear that not all migrants are good intentions, and therefore a security issue comes into play. Again, we as politicians have our duty to protect our people. In view of this threat, I propose that one should consider the temporary suspension of the Schengen Agreement in order to improve our screening of migrants and therefore limit the potential threat that migration is posing. On a final note, I would like to thank the excellent Mongolian hosts who are making our visit memorable. We heartily thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Mercier-Ka. La parole est maintenant à Madame Emma Fattorini et Monsieur Jean-Paul Baquet de France se prépare.
Grazie Presidente. Le prime due relazioni ci hanno fatto bene capire come la missione, lo spirito dell'OSCE sia quello di incardinare i diritti umani nei parlamenti, nel parlamentarismo, nella democrazia, nel controllo legislativo. In questo senso, in questa chiave, noi ci stiamo occupando molto dell'Ucraina, della Russia, dei diritti umani nelle repubbliche post-sovietiche, però oggi abbiamo visto come la migrazione economica e politica sia il centro, il cuore dei nostri interessi, non meno e forse di più dell'altro conflitto. Abbiamo sentito negli ultimi interventi le minoranze, il problema delle minoranze religiose in Medio Oriente. Ecco, io volevo fare questa osservazione che abbiamo già ripreso, abbiamo già sottolineato sia a Vienna che a Helsinki, cioè l'urgenza che l'OSCE ripensi il suo ruolo verso il Mediterraneo, dove non c'è la democrazia, dove non c'è la libertà religiosa, dove non c'è la libertà delle donne. Ecco, io vorrei che questo che mettessimo a tema con urgenza e in modo diciamo, articolato, non solo come appelli. Ho sentito tante cose belle, umanitarie oggi, ma insomma bisognerebbe concretizzare anche dal nostro punto di vista cosa significa il tema dell'immigrazione, che non è solo le frontiere dell'Europa, e questo abbiamo molti canali per farlo, ma cosa possiamo fare noi come OSCE nel Mediterraneo. Grazie.
Merci, Madame. La parole est à Monsieur Jean-Paul Baquet et que Monsieur Falzon de Malte se prépare.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je vais revenir sur le problème de la Méditerranée. Et je ne ferai pas la différence entre les migrants et les réfugiés, car ceux qui se noient, qu'ils soient réfugiés ou qu'ils soient migrants. Et lorsqu'ils sont arrivés dans un pays et qu'ils ne partent que très très rarement, les pays doivent assumer leurs responsabilités. Frontex nous dit qu'il y a aujourd'hui 340 000 migrants ou réfugiés qui sont arrivés, alors qu'il n'y en a eu que 200 000 l'année dernière. 15 000 sont morts. En face de cela, que constate-t-on? Le repli, la fermeture, l'égoïsme ou quelquefois la compassion, la solidarité, pire, l'exploitation médiatique qui se veut déculpabilisatrice. J'ai une pensée en ce moment, bien sûr, pour l'Italie et la Grèce, qui ont dû assumer tout seuls, vu l'incapacité européenne à répondre aux problèmes. Et aujourd'hui, on nous propose une politique de répartition par quota, sans prendre même la peine d'étudier s'il y a des besoins de main-d'œuvre, ça et là. Alors ce que je voudrais, c'est que l'on évite le populisme, la démagogie, le racisme, les tensions raciales, les amalgames, les solutions simplistes et les nationalismes dont on sait où ils conduisent. Ce que je souhaiterais, c'est qu'on revoie bien sûr Schengen, qui a permis la libération de la circulation à l'intérieur, mais qui ne règle pas le problème de l'extérieur. Et puis que l'on dise enfin la vérité. Ce qui se produit actuellement n'est pas accidentel. Ce n'est que le début de grandes migrations. L'Afrique subsaharienne va doubler sa population dans les 15 ans. Cela ne sera pas sans conséquence, d'autant plus que 35% de cette population seulement est scolarisée. Il faut dire la vérité aux populations pour qu'elles comprennent les enjeux et qu'elles les abordent d'une façon différente et pour que l'Europe assume pleinement ses responsabilités. Et puis il faut dire que l'immigration n'est pas une migration de court terme mais de long terme et que le long terme veut dire qu'il faudra qu'il y ait intégration. La France a su en son temps montrer que cela était possible pour les Arméniens, pour les Italiens contre Mussolini, pour les Espagnols contre Franco, pour les boat people. Il faudra demain faire la même chose. Mais pour cela, il faut anticiper. Et pour anticiper, il faut avoir le courage d'assumer ses responsabilités et avoir le courage de dire au peuple la vérité plutôt que de suivre ceux qui ne font que démagogie et solutions simplistes. Voilà,
Merci,
je terminerai, Monsieur le
Baquet.
Président, en disant simplement que dans le
Merci,
même
Monsieur
sens,
Baquet.
pour une politique, je regrette que la Russie ait été rejetée à Helsinki, car nous
La
avons besoin
parole
de
est à
tous.
Monsieur Falzon de Malte, que Monsieur Vigenin de Bulgarie se prépare.
Oui. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for giving me the floor. Okay, thank you. This mic is better. I would like to make a few very short points and speak mainly about migration. May I just remind everyone here where we have passed these last 10 years or these last 20 years. We started by referring to regular migrants. That was the language around 15, 20 years ago. And then that was considered a bit too harsh, and we started speaking about irregular migrants. And then we went and started speaking about asylum seekers, and now to refugees. And that sends one message, I think, that we are becoming much more sensitive, and that this is a reality which is going to stay with us for quite some time. It puts responsibilities on us all, and coming from Malta, which is the southernmost region of the European continent, the southernmost border, I would like to recall, and this is with great pleasure, and we appreciate the attempts to relocate people. Unfortunately, it was not the case 10, 15 years ago when Malta was on the forefront. But now that all of Europe is facing this, it is indeed still a consolation to us all. Let us just be remembered by our good deeds and not by our inactions. Thank you very much.
Merci. La parole est maintenant à Monsieur Vigenin de Bulgarie.
Thank you, Chair. I also share a few thoughts on the topic of our discussion. Functioning democracy is a basis for social and economic development which can reach every citizen, which benefits society as a whole and not specific groups or individuals, which respects the need to conserve environment. Functioning democracy needs a strong civil society and educated people who know and are able to defend their rights. Functioning democracy means also institutions which are accountable and this decision-making process which is transparent and open to civil society. Functioning democracy needs also a competitive political system where citizens have a free choice of ideas, platforms and representatives respectively. And finally, any democracy would not be complete if there are no free media. And on media we see growing problems in a number of our countries. Yes, often media can be formally free in the sense that they are not politically controlled, but more and more we see a concentration of ownership which is threatening their independence. They become defenders of specific private economic interests. They are often used as a tool for pressure on elected representatives to satisfy the interests of their owners. I'm not going to further elaborate on this, but I believe that the regulations on media, not to restrict but to enable their freedom and independence, are an issue where OSCE can play a stronger role. There is no perfect democracy, but we all know how it should look like. And for many years, we were all successfully trying to improve our democratic systems. Now the wind is changing, and I believe we all feel the warning signs. They're visible everywhere, from the authoritarian states, which increase their pressure on the pro-democratic movements and activists, to the emerging democracies where we see uneven progress with ups and downs, to the established democracies where xenophobic extremist and nationalist forces, anti-democratic in their essence, gain ground. We do not need even talk and wishful thinking. A crisis is unfolding, multidimensional and global crisis, which is threatening many of our achievements that we are proud of. Current refugee crisis is one of the consequences of this crisis, which has the potential to further erode our democracies if not addressed properly. By the way, the refugee crisis is a result of our inability to predict and act timely. In other words, approaching the challenges with the hope that this is business as usual will create irreversible damage to all of us. We need to act now because one day our children will ask us, what have you done? Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Vigenin. La parole est maintenant à Monsieur Bédard de la Turquie, qui sera suivi de Monsieur Gerasimov de l'Ukraine. Monsieur Bédard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I would like to take the floor to address briefly some issues raised by the Greek Cypriot delegation. The existence of the Turkish forces in Cyprus from the guarantee system created by the 1960 international treaties, which are also valid for the EU. EU Commissioner Olli Rehn, in his written response of 6 January 2009 to a European Parliament member who questioned the existence of the Treaty of Guarantee, expressed that the Treaty of Guarantee was not terminated when the Greek Cypriot side acceded to the EU. Turkey is not against the concept of reducing its forces on the island to a comprehensive settlement agreement on the island, which should require the reduction of both Turkish and Greek forces on the island in conformity with the treaties of guarantee and of alliance. Last but not least, our commitment for a solution in Cyprus continue, and we maintain our constructive approach. Thank you.
Merci. La parole est maintenant à M. Gerasimov de l'Ukraine, qui sera notre dernier intervenant de la soirée.
Dear Mr. Nari, dear colleagues, Russian statements about children are so cynical and full of hypocrisy, because hostilities, violence and misery in Donbass are the result of Russian aggression against Ukraine. Its generous supply of weapons and ammunition to the terrorists. This must stop. Let me bring to your attention that Ukraine adopted the jurisdiction of International Criminal Court in relation to crimes stemming from the Russian aggression. And we will look forward that all responsible for terrible crimes of war will be brought to justice. Thank you very much.
C'était la dernière intervention, et maintenant je vais demander à Madame Beat Trankmann de bien vouloir nous donner son sentiment sur ce débat qui, je crois, a été riche et intéressant, et un vrai débat parlementaire.
Indeed, Mr. Chairman, very rich debate, and there are a lot of issues, of course, one could pick up on, including the centrality of human rights, and the need for functioning protection mechanisms, in particular for the most vulnerable in times of conflict. But there is another issue that I wanted to zoom in on, and it's an issue actually that some of the members also raised, and an issue that the UN Secretary General highlighted several times in connection with the Syria crisis, but obviously also with other crises around the world. And that is that we need to address these crises at their root causes, which is conflict. It's conflict fueled by deprivation and fueled by the lack of representation. And we know, and we've learned this lesson over and over again, that there is no peace and security without accountable institutions and without development, and vice versa. There is no development progress without functioning governance institutions and without stability. And I think the Sustainable Development Agenda is actually an attempt to try and address these various dimensions and provide, if you like, a comprehensive agenda for political, socio-political, economic, and the sustainability aspects of development. And I think those in parentheses actually will also become increasingly important because, you know, with catastrophic effects of climate change, we may actually in the future see masses of climate change refugees. So I think the need of the hour is basically to agree on this type of a sustainable and comprehensive development agenda, such as what the SDG proposes, and get the commitment and support behind that agenda. And the financing question, of course, will be a crucial question in all of this. How are we going to finance the 17 goals and all the targets that we're looking at across the globe? And domestic sources of financing will be very important, increasing taxation, etc., illicit outflows, bringing in private sector, etc. But I think overseas development assistance also has a very crucial role to play here. And, you know, there is an opportunity basically for us to, if you like, opt up the level of ambition and make sure that we finally all meet the target of 0.7% of GDP to finance development. Because we know that investment in development is actually the best prevention to deal with these issues. So I just wanted to sort of zoom in and give you that perspective. Thank you very much, and thanks for having me, and very interesting debate indeed. Thank you.
Merci, Madame. Merci à tous ceux qui ont participé à ce débat. Merci à nos amis mongols pour leur accueil chaleureux et pour la qualité de cet accueil qui nous a apporté, je crois, encore plus de convivialité et une grande qualité de travail. Notre session d'automne touche à sa fin. Nous allons bientôt commencer la session de clôture. Je vous demande de ne pas quitter la salle pour ne pas perdre de temps. Donc maintenant, place à la session de clôture et merci à tous.
language you like those listings?
English.
It's English now.
Switched off.
Dear colleagues, good afternoon, and happy to see almost full hall for this closing session. President Canerva, unfortunately, is not able to be here at this moment, and he asked me to take his place for this closing session. It's therefore my pleasure to give the floor to Mr. Egbolt, Mr. Niama Egbolt from Mongolian delegation, to our assembly for some concluding remarks, and I'm especially delighted, and we all, to have Speaker of Mongolian Parliament with us. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Honorable Speaker Engbold, esteemed parliamentarians, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me a great honor and privilege to make these concluding remarks for the 2015 autumn meeting of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, which was held in Ulaanbaatar over the past 2 days. On behalf of the State Great Khural of Mongolia, I would like to express once again our sincere appreciation to all of you for coming to Mongolia in pursuit of achieving our common goals through closer dialogue between parliamentarians from the OSCE family. Mongolia considers that the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly represents an important platform for dialogue and cooperation among OSCE participating states and partners for cooperation. As we have discussed, current security challenges in OSCE region are often linked to global ones, in particular to those challenges stemming from the adjacent areas of the OSCE. I have no doubt that the role of parliamentarians in addressing security challenges at the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly meetings remains very crucial. We met here at a crucial time for global and regional security. The risk of political and military polarization is growing globally. In addition, we are confronted with a range of new threats to security with a transnational character, several of which we have discussed during the course of this meeting. Let me at this point highlight some of the sessions of this meeting. As an Asian country, Mongolia fully shares the view that the security of Europe and Asia are indivisible, and thus welcomes any initiatives to foster dialogue and cooperation among nations on both sides of our vast Eurasian continent. To that end, we had a presentation on Northeast Asian security, which I believe has given you an insight into the region's security challenges and opportunities. During this session, we also discussed challenges and emerging transnational threats to security and debated on the conflict in Ukraine. Yes, there have been differences in our views, perceptions, and opinions. However, the very meaning of this kind of gatherings of parliamentarians is to get together, to talk each other, listen to each other, understand each other, and look for commonly acceptable solutions and find them. The second session covered yet another important security challenges we face today. Natural disasters can affect our regions across with serious implications for security and stability. Needless to say that we have to foster regional cooperation in this regard too. In today's session, we have discussed human dimension issues. Mongolia is committed to contribute to the efforts rendered by the international community to strengthen democracy and governance. By the way, this year we are celebrating the 25th anniversary of first democratic elections in Mongolia, so these discussions were of particular interest for us. Ladies and gentlemen, we work together and closer to strengthen our collective resolve to promote peace and security, sustainable development, and human rights around the world. This year we see a number of global processes, namely the UN Summit on the post-2015 Development Agenda is taking place now in New York, and 21st Conference on the Parties under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change will be held in December. These processes offer a unique opportunity to enhance global and regional coherence. We believe that through continued dialogue and cooperative efforts, we can bridge the differences in our opinions, views, and find common approach to addressing the challenges we face today, both old and new challenges. The role of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly in this process is important. Here, I would like to reiterate Mongolia's commitment to actively engage in future work of the Assembly. In these closing remarks, I would like to point out two events specifically. This meeting, in my opinion, has proved that OSCE Parliamentary Assembly's tradition of inclusiveness of all parliaments and parliamentarians, regardless of current circumstances, is very much alive and working. The participation of a delegation of the State Duma of Russian Federation headed by Mr. Naryshkin is one example of this. This, I think, is a demonstration of true spirit of parliamentarism. For the first time in our history, in our meeting's history, Shanghai Cooperation Organization has participated in our meeting with a very interesting presentation. And I hope this has laid a good foundation for two organizations' future, very constructive cooperation for the better security environment on the vast Euro-Asian continent. We also have discussed very urgent topic now facing the OSCE area, the refugee crisis. To address this issue, OSCE-PA should make all the efforts in a coordinated and humanitarian way. In this context, I would like to express our appreciation to many countries in Europe for helping those refugees from conflict zones. Let us continue to use this, our common avenue, to explore opportunities for enhancing cooperation not only among OSCE participating states, but also across our respective regions. Dear parliamentarians, as we are about to conclude our meeting, I wish to express my deep gratitude to President of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, Honorable Ilkka Kanerva, and Chairman of the State Great Khural of Mongolia, His Excellency Enkhbold Dzandakhu, for their stewardship in organizing this very important meeting. My special thanks go to the National Organizing Committee, headed by the Deputy Speaker Donchik Dorj and Ms. Batshemigit Dorj, who is the head of the Mongolian delegation to the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, and their colleagues in the State Great Khural's contact group with OSCE-PA. I would like to also thank all of you, including keynote speakers and moderators of all sessions, for their very active participation. The International Secretariat of the OSCE-PA, headed by Mr. Spencer Oliver and also by Mr. Roberto Montella, our outgoing and incoming Secretary Generals, have been very supportive of our work. And I wish all the best to both Secretary Generals in the future. We once again thank all parliaments that have sent their delegations, all the delegates who have shown very lively and active participation in the meeting. We must thank, on behalf of all our delegates, the team of interpreters. Our dialogue has been this productive thanks to their professional job. Last but not least, I want to thank the Secretariat of the State Great Khural of Mongolia, led by Mr. Boltbata, for its preparatory work on the ground, as well as liaison officers from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the security staff for looking after us so well at this Shangri-La Hotel and other venues. I thank you all once again, and please enjoy your tomorrow's trip to the countryside of Mongolia, which I hope you will enjoy, and where you can experience the glimpse of Mongolian tradition and customs. In conclusion, there's a saying in Mongolia which sounds like Dara Bairta Olzia. This expression, consisting of only 3 words, literally translates into English is simple, see you again. But in Mongolian understanding, it has a very broad meaning. It actually means, let us meet again, and in the meantime, I wish you all the best, health, happiness, success, everything you can enjoy in your life, till we meet again. So, Dara Bairta Olzia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ergbold, and distinguished colleagues. Now, I also would like to take a short opportunity to reflect on our productive and very interesting meeting here in Mongolia. After 2 days of thorough debate, it is, of course, not possible to fully sum up any conclusions. However, I'm sure that we all are more informed and feel more informed on many aspects related to the topic of addressing security challenges and the role of parliamentarians in fostering regional cooperation. I would like to highlight the roundtable discussion with the heads of OSCE field operations in Central Asia and thank them for their very important input. They are our organization's people on the ground who are actively helping OSCE countries to implement the OSCE commitments. The many speakers we have had both from Mongolia and the international community have helped us to address political and security issues, economic and food security topics, as well as humanitarian issues. Whether discussing climate change or pollution, the crisis in and around Ukraine, or the refugee crisis, it is clear that more regional and international cooperation is required. Given the major crisis related to migrants and refugees that are facing many OSCE countries, I'm pleased that we have had an opportunity to also discuss this issue. I think it is clear to all of us that with some 60 million people displaced from their homes, globally, many of them now forced to live in truly terrible situations, and we must increase our efforts to find lasting solutions to this problem. Particularly, and I guess we all are pleased that our political groups agreed on joint statement on this topic, and it's very important to show unity in this assembly. On behalf of our Parliamentary Assembly, I'd like particularly to thank our Mongolian hosts, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Ergbold, all your team. And not only we are all grateful for your warm and generous welcome with wonderful food and truly enjoyable, energetic entertainment, but also I want to thank our Mongolian hosts for their substantive contributions to our discussions. I believe that all of us are leaving Ulaanbaatar much more informed about the significant progress that Mongolia has made in the past 25 years, and also regarding some of the challenges facing this region. Thank you all for your contributions, my dear colleagues. Our discussions will no doubt continue at the reception tonight, hosted by the President of Mongolia, and on our cultural program tomorrow. I guess it will be very interesting. And before closing, I would like to thank all of those behind the scene. We saw so many devoted people all ages, and they have contributed to the organization of this meeting significantly. I'd like to thank Secretariat of Mongolian Parliament, all the staff and security, of course our Secretariat. We have at this moment a unique situation. We have two Secretary Generals, so it's privilege of Mongolia to have two Secretary Generals at this meeting, and all our staff, our Secretariat would like to thank and express our gratefulness. And of course, our interpreters who are helping us all to understand well each other. And with that, I would like formally to close the 2015 autumn meeting. Thank you very much. So, you are free to leave. Closed. Look, people don't want to go. Bernadette. People want to leave to sit and to discuss more issues.